Edward of Woodstock, better known as the Black Prince, was one of the most feared commanders of the 100 Years' War. The eldest son of King Edward III of England, he earned his reputation while still young, fighting at the Battle of Crecy in 1346. At just 16, he commanded part of the English line, where disciplined longbowmen tore through French cavalry and secured a stunning victory. A decade later, in 1356, he cemented his fame at Poitiers. Outnumbered and facing the French king's full army, Edward used terrain and defensive tactics to trap his enemies. His longbowmen and dismounted knights held firm, and in the chaos he captured King John II of France, one of the war's most dramatic moments. His campaigns also inspired fear. Edward's destructive raids across the French countryside, known as chevauchées, aimed to break morale and cripple resources, but they left a legacy of brutality. Though he died before his father and never became king, his victories made him a legend, a symbol of bold generalship and the power of English longbow warfare. Joan of Arc was not a general in the traditional sense. She was never a knight or a trained commander, but in practice, she led as boldly as any of them. Born in 1412, she claimed divine visions and convinced the Dauphin of France to let her support his armies when the 100 Years' War seemed lost. What she lacked in formal rank, she made up for in conviction, strategy, and the ability to inspire men who had given up hope. Her defining moment came in 1429 at the Siege of Orleans. French captains had hesitated for months, but Joan demanded action. Carrying her banner, she rode at the front and urged the assaults that broke the English defences, lifting the siege in a turning point for France. Soon after, she fought at Patay and escorted Charles VII to Reims, where he was crowned with Joan by his side. Captured in 1430 and executed the next year, her short career proved that leadership and vision could rival experience. Joan of Arc was not technically a general, yet she led like one. Charlemagne, or Charles the Great, was the most powerful ruler of the early Middle Ages. King of the Franks and later crowned Emperor of the Romans in 800, he built an empire across much of Western and Central Europe, remembered as both conqueror and unifier. His longest struggle was the Saxon Wars, fought from 772 to 804. For 3 decades the Saxons rose in revolt, only to be driven back again. A turning point came in 785 at Paderborn, where their leader Widukind submitted and accepted baptism, an image often used to symbolize Frankish victory and the forced Christianization of Saxony. These brutal wars secured Charlemagne's northern frontier and folded Saxony into his realm. South of the Alps, he proved just as decisive. In 774, he crushed the Lombard kingdom, took the Iron Crown, and styled himself King of the Lombards, the first Frankish ruler to wear 2 crowns. Later campaigns against the Avars cemented his authority. Charlemagne's legacy went beyond war. Legal reforms, support for learning, and new systems of rule laid foundations for the Holy Roman Empire. By his death in 814, he was remembered as the ruler who reshaped medieval Europe. Genghis Khan, born around 1162 as Temujin, was not just a general, but the ruler of a vast empire, though his battlefield leadership earns him a place amongst history's greatest commanders. The son of a minor tribal leader, he grew up in poverty after his father's death, yet through determination and ruthless skill, he united the fractured Mongol clans. As a commander, he revolutionized warfare. Speed, intelligence networks, and strict discipline let his smaller forces outmaneuver larger states. In 1211 at Yuhuling, his cavalry shattered the Jin dynasty's massive army in northern China, opening the way to capture Zhongdu, modern Beijing. His genius was more than tactics. He promoted men on merit, enforced discipline, and absorbed conquered peoples into his army. By his death in 1227, his empire stretched from the Pacific to the Caspian, proof that Genghis Khan was more than a conqueror. He was a general who reshaped the world order. Richard I of England, better known as Richard the Lionheart, lived from 1157 to 1199 and became one of the most famous kings of the Middle Ages. His legend comes not from ruling at home, but from fighting abroad, especially during the Third Crusade. Richard was rarely in England, spending only a few months of his reign there, but on campaign he was larger than life. In 1191 he captured Acre after a long siege, and later that year he won a decisive victory at Arsuf, where his disciplined cavalry broke through Saladin's forces. Richard's courage was undeniable. He often rode at the front of battle, personally leading charges that inspired his men. Yet this bravery came with costs. His constant wars drained England's treasury, and on his way home from the Crusade he was captured, forcing his people to pay an enormous ransom for his release. Despite these flaws, Richard's reputation as a crusading warrior king endured. Chroniclers and storytellers remember him not as a careful ruler, but as the embodiment of knightly valour, daring, relentless, and unflinching in battle. Even centuries later, the Lionheart remains one of the defining symbols of the medieval kingship and war. Saladin, born in 1137, became one of the most respected commanders of the medieval world, and Richard the Lionheart's most famous rival. Rising from a Kurdish background, he united Egypt and Syria under his leadership, forging a powerful state that could resist the Crusaders. His defining triumph came in 1187 at the Battle of Hadden, where he destroyed the main Crusader army and recaptured Jerusalem, a moment that shocked Europe and launched the Third Crusade. Saladin's strength lay not only in his battlefield skill, but also in his patience and strategy. He used sieges, control of water supplies, and careful timing to wear down his enemies rather than risk reckless charges. Yet what set him apart in legend was his reputation for mercy. When Jerusalem fell, he spared its people from massacre, allowing ransoms instead. This stood in stark contrast to the bloodshed of the First Crusade nearly a century earlier. Even Richard the Lionheart, who clashed with him at Acre and Arsuf, came to respect him as a worthy opponent. When Saladin died in 1193, he left behind little personal wealth, but his reputation as a just and formidable leader endured. Jan Žižka of Bohemia, who lived from around 1360 to 1424, was one of the most innovative commanders of the late Middle Ages. A veteran soldier from earlier conflicts, he rose to prominence in the early 15th century when his homeland was thrown into religious and political turmoil. Žižka quickly gained a reputation for discipline, determination, and the rare ability to turn weakness into strength. Today, his legacy is marked in Prague by one of the largest equestrian statues in the world, a monument to his undefeated record and his role as a national hero. In his own time, he faced Crusader armies that outnumbered and out-equipped his followers, and it was here that he pioneered the use of war wagons, heavy wooden carts reinforced with shields, pikes, crossbows, and early gunpowder weapons. These mobile fortresses allowed ordinary townsfolk to resist and even repel charges from Europe's most feared knights. It was in this setting that Žižka became the defining commander of the Hussite Wars, which raged from 1419 to 1434. At Vitkov Hill in 1420, he defended Prague against a Crusader army sent by the Pope and the Holy Roman Emperor, winning against overwhelming odds. Even after going blind later in life, Žižka continued to command, and he never lost a single battle before his death in 1424. His career remains one of the most extraordinary in medieval military history. William Marshal, often called the greatest knight, rose from unlikely beginnings to become one of the most trusted men in England. Born a younger son with little inheritance, his prospects were slim, yet through skill with sword and lance he earned both wealth and renown. He first made his name in tournaments, where victories brought him fame. By 1217, Marshal was in his 70s, an age when most knights had retired, yet he still led English forces at the Battle of Lincoln against a French invasion. His cavalry charge broke enemy lines, saving young Henry III's crown and securing the kingdom. Beyond war, he served as a regent, guiding England through a dangerous minority with wisdom and authority. Marshal's life embodied both the romance and reality of knighthood, tournaments, battles, loyalty, and leadership. When he died in 1219, even his rivals acknowledged his greatness. That's all for this video. Which general did you think was the most impressive? Let me know in the comments, and if you enjoyed this, make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one.